I call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, February 23rd, 2015. Time is 7 o'clock p.m. Dr. Richardson, there are a number of items in the table file.
Yes, basically the items are personnel items. We have several appointments and several increase, decrease, and change in assignments to be added to the consent agenda.
Okay, if there's no objections, we'll add these to the items to the agenda as we go forward. We now have an opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for members of the district to address the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? Okay. We'll move on then to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet minutes for the regular school board meeting held on Monday, February 9th, 2015. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Motion by Jeff. Second? Second by Ann. Is there any discussion? Okay. So all those in favor of approving the minutes for the regular meeting held on Monday, February 9th, 2015, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Those minutes are approved. So we will move on to announcements and recognition. Dr. Richardson?
Okay, I have 3 items for announcements this evening. First of all, the Northfield Middle School Science Olympiad team did a great job at the regional tournament held at St. Ambrose of Woodbury on Saturday, February the 14th. The team placed 4th overall out of 14 teams, took a 2nd place in the wheeled vehicle and the entomology events. The team of 23 students in grades 6 through 8 under the direction of Mr. Eric McDonald and work-study volunteers from Carleton and St. Olaf are very excited to participate in the state championships, which will be held at Northfield this year at St. Olaf College on Saturday, March the 14th. Would also like to congratulate Nancy Antoine. The Minnesota Elementary School Principals Association, MESPA, has recognized Bridgewater Elementary School Principal Nancy Antoine with the 2015 MESPA Division Leadership Award. This leadership award honors principals whose exemplary leadership and sustained efforts have made noteworthy contributions to the operation of effective school learning programs, improving education, their communities, and their profession. She was recognized by colleagues statewide on February 5th at the MESPA Awards Banquet during the annual MESPA Institute, the statewide convention of Minnesota's elementary and middle school level principals. Nancy is also MESPA's Southeast Division President this year. And then finally, I would like to recognize the World Language Department, who's celebrating world languages this week. Several activities are planned. Each day is designated as a language. Today it was USA, so either we're speaking English or American, one or the other. Tomorrow is French. Wednesday is Chinese. Thursday is German, and Friday is Spanish. I'm not seeing any Greek or Latin here, Rob. I'm not sure what's happening. Students are asked to dress to celebrate the language. Food Service has prepared an international lunch menu with each day reflecting one of the languages taught by NHS. There will be activities such as a trivia contest and sale of buttons designed by language students. Tomorrow, the language classes will have an opportunity to hear presentations from some of our exchange students explaining about their country of origin and the experiences that they're having here in Northfield. So again, congratulations to our language department. And those are the announcements that I have today.
Okay. Is there anything anyone would like to add? Okay. I wanted to just talk quickly about the 10th grade career fair that was held at the high school for all 10th graders as part of the Northfield School District being involved with the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce as a liaison. I was helping Mark Ensreed this year recruit some presenters, and I just wanted to acknowledge, first of all, the high school staff, and particularly the guidance counselors that put together a really wonderful career fair for our 10th graders, and also to our several business professionals in the community that stepped forward to be presenters. And I was helping recruit, and not one person I asked turned me down. I mean, our community is so willing to step forward and partner with us as we try to develop kids that are ready to move on and be successful. So there was quite a wonderful variety of careers presented, from four-year type positions or for your college degree positions to trade, technical, certificate programs. So it was a really great offering for our 10th graders, and also wanted to acknowledge and thank the Northfield News, who did a really wonderful story. They sent a reporter there for the day, and it was really great to have the event published by the Northfield News. So it was all good. Okay. So we'll move on to our first item for discussion and reports, and we start with the ATSNR Preliminary District Master Facilities Plan. Dr. Hutchinson?
And we have Mark Hayes and Tom Tapper here this evening from ATSNR. And again, this is really the culmination of many, many months of work. If you think back, we began a number of months ago initially with a enrollment projections presentation, and took a look at what our enrollment projections were for the next 5 to 10 years. We have had Mark and Tom here on several occasions to talk to you about deferred maintenance issues and taking a look at each building and what are the specific kinds of deferred maintenance pieces that need to be addressed. And then we've asked them to take the next step, which is really to take a look at the overall building conditions for all of our buildings, to look at educational adequacy, and to provide you not only with within the frame of the deferred maintenance, are there other significant potential or possible projects that might be considered above and beyond that. And this was an opportunity for them to really step back and take that kind of 30,000-foot view, looking at each of the buildings in our district and its useful life, and the kinds of repairs and upgrades it would need, and to think about what else beyond that should we be considering. And in considering that, should we be looking at kind of independent efforts in terms of the individual buildings as they currently exist, or should we be looking at interdependent efforts where we're looking at multiple buildings and thinking about how could we work several projects together in order to create a piece that was probably greater than any of the individual independent projects. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your wisdom, and I think Mark has probably had enough of Matt and I over the last several months to not go crazy, but again, we really appreciate all of the work that ATSNR has done and that you and Tom have done in trying to understand kind of the issues that we're facing. If you remember, we had, what was it, Matt, 18 or 19 different listening sessions that we did. So, you know, we've gotten a lot of feedback and a lot of information to kind of bring us to the point of beginning to talk about a preliminary final district master facilities plan. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you. So again, on behalf of ATSNR, thank you for the opportunity to present the preliminary district-wide facilities master plan for the Northfield School District. I believe everybody has in front of them a copy of the report. And what I've got here is a PDF of the entire document. My plan is just to kind of quickly go through the front-end information, maybe explain to you how we've laid out the whole report, and then I think maybe the more important items are getting to section H8, which is the options for planning for the future. But
people, the microphone is a little bit closer. We're recording. I want to make sure that the recording gets
sure.
the quality.
Maybe that's a little better.
There you
go. Thanks. So the way the document is laid out, you've probably seen this, but there's the executive summary that just touches on some of the findings and the highlights of the entire report. And then we've taken each building, each of your 7 buildings, and broken it down to the background, kind of the history, the understanding of each facility, the deferred maintenance items. You see there's a little synopsis of the overall deferred maintenance items for each building, highlights of the educational adequacy, and then a little bit of the demographic analysis for each of your buildings. And also, as you've noticed, I believe it's Appendix A that has the full-blown deferred maintenance plan. So every line item in the entire deferred maintenance list is indicated in that Appendix A. I'm going to just start with Bridgewater, the overview of Bridgewater Elementary School. I'll use Bridgewater as an example of how we prepared the report, and then I'll probably just go through each building again, just highlighting some of the major points that, again, as Dr. Richardson mentioned, we've been here prior, we've talked about the deferred maintenance items at every building. We know you've got a current 10-year plan and your facilities are very well maintained. You're doing a very good job of maintaining those buildings and keeping them up and operational. And then we did that educational adequacy analysis, looking at the needs to accommodate current and kind of upcoming programs for your facilities. And again, then in the fall, there were all those listening sessions that were done by the administration, Dr. Richardson. And so we've taken all that information and tried to condense it into this report. And so as an example, Bridgewater Elementary, a bit of a summary on the building, understanding the age of it, the size of it, the number of students. All your elementaries are 4-section K-5 elementary schools. And then some highlights on some of the deferred maintenance and educational needs items that were identified. So Bridgewater Elementary, site-wise, one of the main concerns had to do with the site access, the congestion that we're seeing as parents line up to pick up or drop off their students in the morning or at the end of the day. The deferred maintenance items I'd like to point out is if you take a look at that deferred maintenance summary, maybe the important thing to look at is there's the consideration level ones, which are kind of maybe, I guess, obviously the highest items of consideration. But then if you look at that summary below, it talks about architectural, mechanical, electrical. So you get an idea of where is it that there's these needs in that facility. And as an example, Bridgewater, that one of all of the consideration levels 1 through 3, about 2 million was identified, but about 1.6, almost 1.7 was in architectural. Now, I know that was in roofing, that maybe around 2017, that building, which is a relatively new building, but at some point that will need a new roof. So you get an idea by looking at that where those needs are, whether it's mechanical upgrades, whether it's architectural, which tend to be the exterior envelope items, or whether it's site, which tend to be paving or parking and things like that. So I just wanted to point that out to you. That's kind of how you can look at that deferred maintenance list. Educational adequacy, how well is the building meeting the needs of the programs and accommodating future programs? So again, highlighting those items that were identified from our analysis, from our review of the facility, meeting with the principals, as well as the information gathered from all those input sessions, staff, student, parents, community members, etc. So again, remembering Bridgewater Elementary, I do believe one of the bigger considerations was having a controlled, secure entry at the front of the building. It's got the remote main office. Also the fact that a lot of these spaces in this facility weren't designed to accommodate kind of the current special needs spaces. So there's lots of programs that are housed in smaller spaces that weren't necessarily designed for that function. Then we also this is where we summarized the information from those input sessions. There was 3 questions that were asked of every group, and that was, the questions were, what is working well within your building? What is not working well in your building? And then thirdly, if you could, what would you design in your buildings to make it work better? So that was asked at every group session. That was documented and then summarized for every one of these facilities. And it's nice to read through it. It's nice to see what people think is working well. There's a lot of good things happening in your buildings. It's nice to read through those, and you can see, the media center is awesome, the band and music areas are excellent, natural lighting is provided throughout, etc. It's nice to touch on those, to read through those. And then it's also important to know that stuff so that if we do something to that building, we want to make sure that we don't do something to negatively impact the things that are working well. That'd be our goal. And then each building has a summary of the demographic study. And if you remember, really that demographic study really showed that there really wasn't an increase in the number of students district-wide, especially at the elementary levels. There tended to be a decline in the number of students, is what was is what came out of that report. There's a bit of a bubble of students that kind of are moving through the district. That'll be moving to middle school and then eventually the high school, but overall, really not an increase in the number of students anticipated in the district. So each one of these, again, kind of summarizes the demographic analysis for each building. So, and then there's a bit of a summary at the end. In this case, it talks about Bridgewater being the newest elementary in the district. Again, it's all your facilities have really been well maintained. There are some shortcomings that exist in terms of deferred maintenance and educational adequacy. Again, in this case, talked about the controlled entry, accommodating those special needs spaces, and some traffic flow issues. So again, that's, I guess, a summary of how we've done each one of these assessments of each of your facilities. So I'm going to just somewhat quickly go through and highlight some of the items at each building. Okay. So again, Greenvale Park, there were originally some needs identified in terms of site circulation, but I believe those have been corrected really over the last summer, and so I think we're fairly good in terms of some of the site circulation issues at Greenvale Park. The educational adequacy highlights well, okay, let me go back, sorry. I'll just touch on the deferred maintenance. So again, deferred maintenance at Greenvale Park, again, looking at that summary, consideration level 1 items. Again, here you'll see mechanical level 1s are at about $2.7 million. So this is a building designed in the 70s, 1970. So that building is now about 45 years old. Hasn't had a whole lot of improvements done in terms of any mechanical upgrades. So there are a bit of a need there in terms of some mechanical systems at Greenvale Park. Some of the items from the educational adequacy, that there used to be a classroom here that was an ELABE classroom that was lost due to adding another section of 3rd grade. There's the controlled entry that's needed. We believe that can be accommodated fairly simply. No need for any addition or things like that, but just by modifying that vestibule and how you enter and exit the main office. A lot of comments about the facility in terms of natural light. It's a very efficient, compact plan in terms of a lot of interior classroom teaching spaces. It's an open classroom concept, so there were some issues identified there in terms of acoustics and distractions and maybe even some control in terms of lockdown. And it is interesting because if you do look at what is working well in the facility, if I could jump to that, yeah, right here. What was working well in the building? Well, one of the comments was the open design of the school. And I know that when I met with the principal and talked about that facility, the principal really liked the openness and the connectivity of Greenvale Park Elementary. So it's a bit of a struggle between how do you have the open concept, the connections and things like that, as well as having, what do you do maybe in terms of more of a lockdown type situation. And there's ways to zone the building and things like that could address some of those concerns. Similarly, demographic, again, not really kind of a decrease in the number of students anticipated in the next 5 and 10 years. Sibley Elementary School, not much in terms of site necessarily. There was a talk of maybe some additional parking in front of the building. Additional parking spaces would be desirable. Deferred maintenance items, again, the highlights here. Again, mostly some architectural, not a whole lot. Some site, again, I know that part of that site had to do with, I believe, some mill and overlay, as well as adding some of those parking spaces that I mentioned. Educational adequacy. Sibley, if you guys remember, Sibley was the one elementary that doesn't have the 2 spaces for band and music, band, orchestra, and music. And I should say, too, in appendix, let's see, Appendix D is the room-by-room analysis of all the buildings. So what that shows is that if you look at that, you could look at the size of the classrooms. At each elementary, it would tell you the average size of the classroom, and it would tell you, I have to look at it. I don't know if it tells you the square footage. I think it might tell you the square footage of every classroom in the building, and it gives you the average of the classrooms. If you also look at media centers, cafeterias, phy-ed spaces, it'll tell you the size of the phy-ed station at each elementary. And you'll see if you look at Sibley, that Sibley is the one building that doesn't have the 2 music programs. It's also the one that has the smallest media center, kind of by far. Smallest cafeteria, well, it is the smallest cafeteria. I believe it's also close in size to the cafeteria at Greenville Park. But anyway, this is the one facility that I believe really needed the additional band music classroom. So there's some rehearsal and storage space needed for the music program. Again, it also has the smallest media center and cafeteria. And this has, almost 600 students, as does Bridgewater, so it's one of the larger of your elementaries, and so it's really seen kind of these space constraints, as well as the need for some of those same special needs spaces. Again, they've got special needs spaces that are in very, very small rooms that maybe weren't originally designed to accommodate those sorts of programs that are now offered in your district. And then I guess I also mentioned here too, I think it's the one elementary. It does have computer labs, but they're remote to the media center. The other ones are contiguous to the media center. In terms of, I'm going to jump to the next facility, the Longfellow Early Childhood ALC facility. Most of the items at Longfellow talked about some of the site needs for additional parking spaces, needs for improved site circulation and bus drop-off. A lot of comments from the focus group meetings about needs to upgrade the playground facilities. So that was something that we took seriously. From the standpoint of the deferred maintenance items, you can see there again about $1 million of deferred maintenance items. So Longfellow is I believe your oldest building in the district. So 1941, 1962. So a lot of those items on the deferred maintenance list have to do with tuck pointing, maintaining the exterior envelope, replacement of exterior windows, doors. Again, not uncommon, as buildings age, they start to need certain upgrades for energy efficiency and just to maintain that envelope. So a lot of that, almost all of that, as you can see, was the architectural exterior envelope items. Some of the educational adequacy items, really a lot of the comments, again, had to do with, it'd be wonderful if this facility was large enough to accommodate our programs, to accommodate increase opportunities in our programs. It'd be nice if we could all be located in one facility, because some of the other early childhood programs are over at the NCRC. That was a lot of the comments, other than things like the lower level toilet rooms aren't handicap accessible. There's an office that's not handicap accessible. But those were really the big items at Longfellow. Lack of space restricts daycare enrollment, etc. Upper level is the ALC. Really, I guess I'd say very few comments or needs at the ALC. It seemed like that was working quite fine. I really didn't do anything in terms of needed upgrades to the ALC portion of that facility. Northfield Middle School, I'm going to jump to that if you're all following with me. Northfield Middle School, similar comment to, I believe, Bridgewater in terms of site circulation. A lot of congestion at that entrance where, again, I believe parents are lining up more likely kind of the end of the day to pick up their students. So congestion as you head out onto Highway 246. There were also comments about, the distance to get to the main entry from the visitor parking, the parking lot, and some things like that. And, really, just some of those items, it was just really kind of hard to really address some of those needs at this point with that newer facility that you've got. The deferred maintenance items, not much in terms of deferred maintenance in the consideration level 1s. I know that in consideration level 2, you can see there's about 2.4 million. I know that almost all of that was for a re-roof. So again, eventually that facility would be getting pretty old. Probably not until at least 2020 or so would you start needing to consider to replace that roof. But that's why you see that large number of a total of about 3 million on all your consideration levels. It's eventually we'll need to look at replacing that roof. In terms of educational adequacy, comments were about the cafeteria being small, and it'd be nice if we could get a 6th grade science classrooms into the 6th grade house that's off to the right. Right now it's kind of departmentalized, and the science labs are located in one part of the building. Again, we looked at these items, and with kind of looking at district-wide needs, I just felt it would be hard to address these at this point, because trying to accommodate and make the cafeteria larger, trying to accommodate science classrooms over in that wing without having to add classrooms, frankly, at this point I just did not see it as being a real viable option. So you'll see that right now at Northfield Middle School, the one item that we really are addressing is the site circulation issue, when you see the options that we're going to be presenting to you. And then I think, not lastly, but second to last, Northfield High School. So, quite a few items in terms of the site circulation, site utilization, the lack of outdoor facilities. There's now been the lacrosse program that's been added. Lacrosse can't play in Memorial Stadium, and there's some drainage issues on site. The Rock House being remote adds to kind of travel and circulation and security issues. Even things like an identifiable main entrance to the building, congestion at the exit as people are trying to enter and exit the site. From a deferred maintenance standpoint, architecturally, it seems to be the highlight in terms of consideration level 1. And again, I know because it's an older building. Some of the additions go back quite a few years. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact date.
1963.
1963 was the first edition. Thank you. So I know that a lot of those, again, have to do with exterior envelope, tuck pointing, exterior window replacement, door replacement, things like that is what's on the list. And again, not uncommon when you have an older facility. Looking at the educational adequacy items for the high school, a lot of items on the image here. Control entry needed. You don't have the secure entry right now at the main office. You really, what I'm going to call a controlled entrance, right? That's where you get the public that comes into your facility and they get routed through the main office. I'm not just talking about a, video door station or something like that, like you also have at the district office. So controlled entries would be desirable at the district office, at the main office. There are lots of space needs at the elementary in terms of accommodating all the different people that are now housed in that facility, including the career center and things like that. Comments about congestion in corridors, the sprawled out layout of the facility. Some of these are, it's an existing facility and are very, very hard to try to address without significant cost ramifications. But there's also the need for the additional music suite, which would be another potentially orchestra room, which they are currently lacking. You've got the 3 music programs, but you've only got the 2 music spaces. Middle school has the 3 appropriate music spaces. There's also the fact that you've got some of the ensemble and practice rooms are up a level. They're not handicap accessible. You've also got the accessibility issues. You've got them accommodated over on the girls' on the girls' locker room side, but you literally, if you're handicapped, you take an elevator down and you go across the main gym floor to get over to the boys' locker room, which isn't really necessarily treating, everybody equally. There's also a lack of phy-ed space, very limited, just good physical education space. You've got the one gymnasium for that need. Otherwise, the other spaces are pretty well specialized spaces. So there is a need for additional phy-ed space, as well as the lower level locker rooms. As we talked before, not handicap accessible, aging lockers, not very easy to supervise those spaces. If you were down there, you'd understand what I mean. And I talked about the Rock House already. So that's the highlight of some of the needs at the elementary school. And then lastly, we did summarize the Northfield Community Resource Center. There really wasn't, that's a leased facility, so there really weren't deferred maintenance items, things like that. And in terms of educational adequacy, I know one of the things that rose to the top was comments about the sibling care room being small. So I think if we look at doing something with these programs, we need to make sure that we provide appropriate spaces for those activities. So I believe that quickly takes us through the summary of your 7 facilities. Okay, and then now maybe this is the important part, and this is getting to how do we plan for the future. So what we did is based on these needs, we came up with 2 approaches. One we called the independent approach, where you could kind of look at each building and maybe address these needs at each building somewhat independently. And then there's the interdependent approach. It's the interdependent approach, and we call it the repurposing. Repurposing and
repurposing and upgrading.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, right. Interdependent action to repurpose and upgrade facilities. Thank you. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to go through these options, okay? So the first one is the independent action to upgrade facilities. So we looked at the needs of Bridgewater. And taking a close look at Bridgewater, rather than actually widening that entry to the site, it seemed that by doing some minor modifications to site circulation, creating some one-way traffic at that facility, and kind of extending where parents can park and wait to pick up their students at the end of the day, that we could accommodate those needs fairly readily. And looking at doing an addition to Bridgewater to accommodate the secure entrance. And that is really twofold, in that by moving an entrance to the front that would house the main office, the nurse, the principal, social worker, conference room, staff toilet, that would then free up the needed special needs space where we would remodel the old main office that's central to the building. And we have about 1,750 square feet of remodeling to accommodate the Read 180, the Title I, the math corridor, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe that really addresses some of the main needs at Bridgewater Elementary School, with about a 4,000 square foot addition at the front to get the controlled entrance. So that red area identifies the addition that would be proposed to be at the front of the building, and then I did highlight in that light blue with the heavy dashed black line around them, those would be the other internal areas that could be remodeled to accommodate those special needs programs. And to do that, I do have project cost estimates that I put together. So it is an estimate, but it's based on a lot of remodeling and additions that we've done throughout the districts that we work with. So that would be about $1.7 million to do that work. Greenville Park, looking at those needs. What I did is, site-wise, I think we're in good shape because some of those modifications were done last summer. But I really did was I looked at doing an addition to Greenville Park. Not a huge addition, but a 2-classroom addition. And what that would do is that would gain some space that was lost by putting in that that fourth section of third grade last year. We lost that EL ABE classroom. So I'm proposing just a 2-classroom addition that might go what I believe is on the west side of Greenville. And that would gain us the use of a space right here for that EL ABE. It would also create a space out in front, is what I'm showing, where you could gain some more special needs space and also create maybe some flexible breakout type space for potentially a first grade house, is what that is showing, if you can see that on the plan. This plan then also anticipates doing some of those upgrades to accommodate the natural light. Again, you've got a lot of these interior classrooms, a very compact, efficient design, but not much natural light in all the teaching stations. And that, well, whenever we do additions, newer facilities, we're always trying to get natural light into teaching stations. So just on these internal spaces, I've added some skylights to get natural light in there, even in the media center. And then I proposed some ways to do some partial enclosure of those classrooms just to reduce some of those noise, the distractions, and then kind of increase the some of those open issues regarding the classrooms. Now, when we do that, when we start to go into this building, which I know that there's 1 fan coil unit for 2 classrooms. Once you start going into these classrooms, you start to modify them and you start to create more partitions to create enclosed spaces. This would be an appropriate time to look at modifying your mechanical system. It's steam, it's inefficient. Even though it's on the deferred maintenance list, as you have deferred maintenance needs in all your buildings, this is something where when you do this work, it would really be wise and prudent to do those upgrades at that time. Most of the other stuff in the other buildings is somewhat independent. You need to do things, but you won't have to do it necessarily when we're doing some of this other work. This is one of those things where I took that $2.8 million that's on the deferred maintenance list, and I put that into this project. And I think I didn't mention it right now, but earlier I talked about doing that controlled entry, getting a controlled entry by modifying fairly simply some vestibules and entrances as you get into that main entrance. So that, including about the $2.8 million of mechanical upgrades, is going to be about approximately $5.8 million project cost. And remember, these are project costs, so that includes permits and borings and surveys and FF&E and AE, architectural engineering fees and things like that, testing. So, if someone says, geez, if we can do an addition for, less than that, well, just keep in mind, please, that these are all road project costs. Okay, so that anticipates doing some of these upgrades to Greenville Park to keep it functioning as that K-5 elementary school. Okay. Then Sibley Elementary. Really, this one, I think there's a couple things that we proposed that we could do at Sibley Elementary. So one is that 3,300 square foot music special needs addition to the south end of the building to accommodate that additional music space. And then the other one is if we want to try to address the small media center cafeteria, which I kind of believe are really 2 different things. So you'll see here, fairly simply, you could do a music addition to the south end of that building. It'd be a larger addition where you could also accommodate some of these special needs spaces. I just made the building a little bit larger, the addition. The cafeteria remodel and the media center expansion or addition, that got a little more complicated. I mean, there's probably there were lots of versions that even we came up with when we were trying to identify how to resolve this issue. But the one that seemed to make the most sense to me was expanding that cafeteria. And you could get some multi-purpose space in that cafeteria. You might even have some leftover space for some special needs and things like that. But we just said right now we could expand that cafeteria and then build an appropriately sized media center. And we tried to minimize the impact on the site. We tried to minimize the impact in the building. And so what we did is we took that one computer lab and we kind of said we'd use that as an access point, probably do a little bit of remodeling to that one computer lab, and then move into the media center and have another computer lab in that media center. So it's a little bit larger than just a media center. It would also include another new computer lab and then remodeling for that other computer lab, as well as it accommodates the remodeling of the cafeteria. So again, I kind of see those, the cafeteria media center as one item, and then the music expansion as potentially another item. And that's why at the very bottom I said estimated cost for the music addition is approximately $1.2 million, and the cost to do the media center and cafeteria addition and remodeling is about $2.3 million. I guess the one other thing I should point out is that because I did include a computer lab in the media center, it seemed appropriate that if we're going to build a new media center, it'd be nice to have the computer lab included as part of it. It did free up another classroom. So I guess that would be one of the buildings in the district that has somewhat of a flex classroom, depending on the enrollment of that facility, or it could be used for other activities, other programs, special needs, and things like that. The Longfellow ECALC, again, mostly site needs in terms of upgrades to the playground equipment, in terms of adding parking spaces and improving bus drop-off site circulation. And then, there were the things about, again, just putting in some handicap accessible toilet rooms on that lowest level, and that was really it in terms of needs at Longfellow. And that would be about $0.5 million, or about $500,000 for those upgrades. The middle school, really what we identified there was that site circulation issue, widening that road as you approach the site to allow just a lot more space for parents to be dropping off their students or picking them up at the end of the day. So that was really what we identified as the need at the middle school. And so that was about $200,000 to do that to the site. But otherwise, we really weren't doing anything else at the middle school as part of this process. And then the high school. So trying to condense and locate potential additions and alterations in one area, we came up with this scheme. So again, this gives you the overall lay of the land for that building and what it proposes to accommodate the educational adequacy needs at the high school. Would include a main entrance, as well as a new identifiable main entrance, controlled entry, and new main office. Appropriately sized main office to provide space for all the appropriate people, provide appropriate space for the career center, for the student services, for attendance, etc. And you'll see on the plan, I think it improves circulation on the building a little bit. And then it also then locates one addition at that southwest corner, where that addition would accommodate the new orchestra room, practice spaces, the Fayed auxiliary gym is what I'm calling it. So it would be about a 20,000 square foot addition at the southwest corner of the building, and then approximately 8,000 square foot addition towards the front, as well as appropriate site circulation issues in order to get those additions to work and get the traffic circulation around the building. The other things that you couldn't see from that plan, it would then take the district office and relocate the district office to the old main office. It would then build the new main office at the front of the building. The district office would then be remodeled to accommodate the Rock House. So now the district office and the main office are really kind of at that one front controlled entry, not a separate entity. It would also include those upgrades to the lower level of locker rooms, boys and girls addressing finish upgrades, locker upgrades, handicap accessibility upgrades. I added an elevator. Okay, I didn't know how else to address these handicap accessibility issues, at the gym and at the upper level music, because also when you're at the upper level, you're walking through is it the dance studio? you're kind of walking through the dance studio to get over to the music room suite side of the building. So I added another elevator. Buildings weren't designed back in the 70s to accommodate ADA. And then, as you can see, it anticipates this orchestra room addition. Now it just says orchestra, but it would also be office, instrument storage, ensemble, practice type spaces, and then that auxiliary gymnasium. And you can see by my arrows when I said I was hoping to maybe accommodate some circulation issues. By putting the main office where I did, I thought at least we could maybe create a connection with that H wing to the main office, which might just, at least allow people to have closer access, reduce some of the travel times and things around the building. But remember that, so this identifies, I believe, kind of some of the big picture needs at this school. I can't resolve the sprawling school. It's hard to resolve the congested corridors and some of those things.
Squeeze it back in the box.
But I believe it really touches on, what I believe are the critical needs at this facility. So to do these additions and these alterations that I'm showing would be about $12.5 million. And then putting a synthetic turf field on the site would resolve some of these site issues where you can get better utilization of your field, and then you can get some lacrosse practice on the Memorial Stadium, and this also anticipates addressing some of those drainage issues on the site. So that would be about $2 million to do those upgrades to the site. So what this looks like, this approach one that we call the independent action to upgrade facilities, what this looks like, I tried to create this summary slide, okay? So this shows your K-5 elementary schools, and this shows that if you did that addition to Bridgewater, and you did the remodeling for the special needs spaces, that's at $1.7 million. If you did the upgrades to Greenvale Park, if you did that small addition, if you did those interior upgrades for the open classrooms, if you did the mechanical upgrades, the skylights, etc., that's at 5.8. And then if you did those upgrades to Sibley Elementary, and this is where I broke it out a little bit, but I said if you did the music addition, about 1.2 million, and then if you did the media center cafeteria expansion, about 2.3 million. So in this scenario, to do all those proposed upgrades, not including the deferred maintenance items, except the 2.8 at Greenville Park that I mentioned earlier, that could range between $8.7 to $11 million for the elementary facilities. The middle school, that's that $200,000 for the site work that we talked about, and then the high school. So again, doing the orchestra addition, the locker room upgrades, the auxiliary gym, et cetera, that's the 12.5 plus the $2 million for the site work that I mentioned, would be a total of about 14.5. And then lastly, I've located the district facilities off to the right. We've got Longfellow, that's really the site issues and the handicap accessible parts for the $500,000 that I talked about, and really no upgrades to the Northfield Community Resource Center. So, if one were to select every one of those things and do all those upgrades district-wide, this gives you the total estimated project cost potentially of $22.4 to $26.7 million. The difference being that 2.3 million. That's the one thing I somewhat broke out, the 2.3 million at Sibley. Okay. So then I'm going to jump to the next approach.
Mark, maybe
Yes.
before you go forward here. So again, really to summarize this piece, these are independent actions. In other words, every single one of these could be done independently. The board could say, we want to fix Sibley, or we want to do something to Bridgewater, or we want to make a fix to the high school, or we want to expand the driveway at Northfield Middle School. Each of those items could be done totally independent of any other project. There is no interdependence between the projects in terms of having something have to happen for something else to work. But in doing it, the issue becomes, if you do some of these fixes, the ability to take a look at the future interdependent projects may go away, because once you
Right.
spend $12.5 million on the high school, or if you spend $5.8 million at Greenville Park, it's very unlikely that people are going to be interested in looking at a bigger project that might tie pieces together. So I think what's really important as you think about these pieces is these are ones that Mark and Tom have laid out as saying you could do each of these independently, but one of the initial decisions you're making as a board is to say, we plan to maintain all of the existing buildings in somewhat the configuration that they're currently in. And that our fixes, again, are beyond deferred maintenance, but they are really focused in terms of saying, what are things we could do to the existing buildings to make them better support the needs of kids and security and usability. Correct?
Correct. So you are right in that when you see the approach 2, you would be taking a different approach at the high school and at Greenville Park, meaning if you went with this approach 1, you're pretty much locked into this approach and how you're using your current facilities, as I believe Dr. Richardson was just saying. But you'll see in approach 2, we're looking at actually potentially a new elementary school and potentially a new high school. And so you would not then, do $12.5 million of additions and alterations, I believe, at the high school, because once you did that, you'd be pretty much locked in. Similarly, as you'll see, that if you were to do upgrades to Greenville Park under approach 1, you'd pretty much be locked in, because you'll see in approach 2, we're looking at repurposing Greenville Park for an early childhood community center. So, yeah, even though we call it independent approach, it's really tough to summarize that.
The independence piece has tails.
Yes.
And again, to frame it, it really doesn't have any tails on Bridgewater, because Bridgewater would be a standalone.
Right.
It doesn't really have any impact on Sibley Elementary, and it doesn't really have any impact on Northfield Middle School. But really, the other 3 buildings, Greenville Park, the high school, and Longfellow, depending on the direction you take, could have a very different outcome than these independent pieces. But once you choose to do the independent approach, I think in our minds, you have pretty much said, we're not going forward with looking at any different strategies. You're saying we're going to be satisfied to keep the building spaces that we have, and we're not going to try to address any other issues. So just as you're going through this, that's something to kind of keep in your head as we're moving through this process. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to move on to approach 2, and I guess maybe that'll be the time after that I'll open it up for questions and comments, okay? I mean, not that you can't ask a question. Okay, so approach 2, we call it interdependent action and repurposed upgrade facilities. So you'll see that this is an option where we looked at maybe how best to utilize existing facilities and maybe how best to consolidate and locate all your programs in one building or in a certain building to create efficiencies and collaboration and maybe provide more program space for certain programs. So this one, we started out looking at Greenville Park, okay? And what would be a good use of Greenville Park? It's one of the older buildings, but it's got open spaces, it's got some flexibility in terms of trying to do some alterations. It's an easier building to do any alterations to because there's less fixed walls and things like that. So in this option, the idea was let's take and consolidate all those early childhood, community ed, adult basic ed functions in one facility. That came up a lot. And this facility would also accommodate some additional space for expanding some of those programs. So I know that, I've added on this drawing, I've shown additional infant and toddler and preschool spaces, anticipating some expansion of those current programs. Now, it wouldn't have to be those programs. It could be maybe ECSE or ECFE, but there is space in this building to accommodate some of those program needs. I mean, if this space also would work great, or the building would work great, you've got the media center that could be education. You've got the cafeteria, which of course could work as the playroom and the serving area. You've got the gymnasium, which could also work as phy-ed and adaptive PE. You've got art, you've got music, so you could have some great programs at this facility to accommodate, to serve these clients. In this option, we still looked at doing that controlled entry. And then there would be some building-wide upgrades needed to provide appropriate, age-appropriate facilities. I believe we might have to go in there and do some handicap accessibility upgrades. Now that you're somewhat changing the use of the building, we'd probably have to do some handicap accessibility upgrades, I believe. And this plan also anticipates doing some remodeling to some of the internal spaces, but I do not believe you'd need to do the same enclosing of all the classrooms like we're proposing on the if it stayed as a K-5 facility. A lot of these programs you have parents with the students. You also, I think, less of a need for some of the natural light issues, whereas if a student is in a classroom all day, I believe natural light's more important, but if they're there periodically and not there all day, I believe it's not as critical. So I did not anticipate doing some of those same upgrades in interior skylights, etc., that I did under the first scenario. So this option, doing these upgrades that I just alluded to, repurposing this facility to be the early childhood, what I called community center, locating all those facilities in one building, was about $600,000. Then the second thing, and I think this will make sense when you see the summary slide at the end, but we have now repurposed Greenville Park Elementary, and so this option would propose building a new elementary school. So it's a 600-student K-5 elementary, about 90,000 square feet, which is a little bit larger than your Bridgewater facility. I anticipated a 2-story classroom wing, so it's more efficient, it takes up less area, more efficient placed on the site, and we proposed actually adding it to Greenville Park Elementary site. If you remember, if my numbers are correct, I believe Bridgewater is about 10 acres, and Greenville and Sibley are about 21 acres. So I believe, as you can see, this plan literally is taking Bridgewater, putting it on your site, putting a 2-story classroom wing on it, looking at how we might be able to accommodate the bus drop-off out front, doubling the size of the parking lot, etc. So doing this would be estimated cost about $22 million for the new elementary school in the Greenville Park site. And then the plan would be that we would repurpose Longfellow, and we'd move the district office into Longfellow. So all the district offices would all be located in one facility. Currently they are spread out through numerous facilities. Okay, and then ALC would remain on the 3rd floor pretty much as is, and we anticipated the lower level of Longfellow would really remain the same. There's the need to accommodate daycare programs for the ALC students, and so we said we're going to leave that lower level daycare there for the ALC students. So it anticipates less site improvements. We'd still add some parking. We wouldn't have to do as much work to the play equipment, to the bus drop-off. And we still would do those upgrades to the lower level ADA toilet rooms for students. And then we'd do a little bit of repurposing of some of those classroom spaces to make them office spaces. We anticipated needing to put in some private offices that would be located among some open office cubicles. And I guess my thought was it might be nice to take that old gymnasium, make that into kind of a multi-purpose meeting, boardroom, staff development type meeting space. So I anticipated some remodeling in the old gymnasium. But otherwise, I just showed bubbles where I anticipated some remodeling work to accommodate some private classrooms and some kind of open cubicle, private offices and open office cubicle type environments. But I believe I know there's plenty of space there to bring in district office and bring all those activities into one building. And then that, of course, would mean that we no longer would utilize the NCRC, because we've taken the people out of the NCRC. We've located all those early childhood, adult basic ed, community ed type programs at Greenville Park. We've moved the district office into the spaces where some of those activities were occurring at Longfellow. And I apologize if I keep saying Longville instead of Longfellow. I think I keep saying Longville. Anyway, sorry. So in doing this scenario, we are really getting rid of decommissioning the existing high school as an option. Okay? So in this scenario, it would be building a brand new high school. And this is, kind of looking long-term, district-wide, long-range facility plan, which is really kind of, I think, the direction we were given. How can we address our needs? Long-range plan here. So this is one of those long-range looks at the district. But this will be a new high school, about 255,000 square feet, and about 1,500 students, grades 9 through 12. This also anticipates that doing those upgrades to the site in terms of the turf field, we aren't getting rid of Memorial Stadium, that would stay where it is the proposal. We could build this high school at the southeast corner on the existing site. The staging would be such that you could build the high school, get that thing up and operational, move students into the high school, and then demolish the old high school. So there is about almost $4 million in here to remove, to demolish, fill in the hole of the old high school. And again, concept site plan, but you can see where we tried to see how would it fit on the site. This literally is about a 1,500 student high school, 2-story classroom building, so a lot more efficient than your current, single-story sprawled out plan. And then looking at how we could relocate some of those field activity functions, and still trying to keep some of the parking spaces, some of the site circulation, the tennis courts, and some of those things conceptually. Now, to do a brand new high school and do all those things I just mentioned, including the artificial turf at Memorial Stadium, that's about $78.5 million. Okay? So in summary, the summary of approach 2, what we call the interdependent action repurpose to upgrade facilities, as Dr. Richardson was saying, you can see here Bridgewater is really still the same project, same concept. Sibley Elementary is the same, no changes at Sibley. However, Greenville Park, you can see under the grade K through 5, I've put the new Greenville Park Elementary over there for potentially $22 million. And on the district side, Greenville Park gets recommissioned or repurposed to be the EC Community Center facility. Same thing at the middle school, just the site work. Again, the high school would be demolished. The new high school would be built. $78.5 million possibly. Longfellow becomes the district office / ALC, and the Northfield Community Center would no longer be utilized by the district. So if you took this approach, long-term approach, long-range look at the district, and you did all the work on here, conceivably you could be at 104.9 million to $107.2 million.
So do we need to bring the AED in?
And I'm going to throw this out here. These were the concepts that we came up with to address your needs district-wide, and if there's other options that you want us to take a look at, we'd be very open to looking at other possible reconfigurations. Or I do believe this is one thing. I don't know that this would have much impact on boundaries. If we did this, I believe it pretty much would keep buildings the way they are for the most part. We didn't look at reconfiguring buildings and changing boundaries district-wide, things like that. That might be another, thing to look at. But So, how to summarize this? I think that does kind of summarize it. I think that's what we came up with in terms of the two options, the option one and or approach one, approach two.
Okay, Mark, as you look at approach two, I think the key thing, if you could just talk a minute about it, is, again, in approach two, Bridgewater and Sibley stand alone.
Correct.
The middle school stands alone.
Yeah.
You could segregate the two key project pieces by, you could determine you want to do something with Greenville Park. You could do that. If you make the decision to do that, it has no impact on the high school at all. Correct?
Yeah, I believe so. Right. You
So,
could, yes, yes.
so that piece kind of pushes one direction.
Right.
The other piece is if the determination was, no, the most important thing to do in terms of a big project is to address the high school. That could be done by itself
Correct.
if you went that direction.
Right.
So this is about 6 different sets of moving parts at the same time as we're kind of looking at it. So, you know, as we look and we're going forward with this, and I know I am anticipating that one of the things that you're going to be asking us for soon would be the breakdown of when all of the current bond issues are coming due and will be done, and the impact of each of those pieces in terms of how that potentially reduces taxes and the debt service for each of those buildings. But the idea here is, although all of these things are kind of laid together in approach two, you still have really 3 buildings that are standalone that could be done in any order or at any time you felt they needed to be done.
Right.
And you have an elementary preschool community services piece that's kind of one side,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a high school piece that's really the other side of the coin. So as we're kind of working through this, that's part of what I think has to be thought through in terms of what makes sense to you. And I guess the only other thing that I'm going to shut up and let, because I know these guys have plenty of questions to ask, but I think the other thing that going forward, I think as you and I and Matt discussed and you shared with us your thoughts about the middle school, again, we know there are some issues with the middle school, even though it was opened in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, when we look at buildings built in 41, 71, 63, and so on, we really didn't, I think any of us feel that we could step forward with any kind of significant changes at the middle school at this point when we had major needs in really every other building. And so if there's a question as people go forward saying, well, you know, why didn't you address that science lab at the middle school, or why didn't you address doing, you know, modification of the cafeteria or whatever, it really is coming back to it's very difficult in doing something like that to a building that's 10 years old when we have many other needs that we think would queue in front of that as far as the possibilities. Okay.
Okay, so
Madam
board
Chair.
members, questions, comments? Give me a minute to think. Ann?
I just want to give a comment. I found this really, really helpful, the whole package that you gave to us, and that I really appreciate how well you have the text and the pictures, and it's a really nice job. And boy, I hope we could afford all of it.
Yeah. And as Dr. Richardson said, it's you know, it's not as simple as it looks like with approach one, approach two. There's, you know, it was kind of hard to try to break it all out and make it make sense. But you're right. If you look at it in terms of you could do the high school, you could do the Greenville Park. There are independent pieces in there. It's not necessarily just option one or approach two. But thank you.
But at the same time, if you do approach one at Greenville Park, or approach one at the high school, for all intents and purposes, you close the door for approach 2 on either of those sites.
Right, yes.
So what would help me to understand, and this is probably more you, Dr. Richardson, is, we could dive deep. I have other questions that are specific to the plans, but what I'm not really clear about is we're looking at a 10-year sort of plan, and we're looking at eventually coming to some sort of resolution or decision about that. But so what's not clear to me is what do we discuss tonight? What do you envision the outlook being in terms of we need to come together on a facilities plan for 10 years, and we've got pieces here, and we're not sure, then we assume we slot them through a 10-year plan and sort of try to anticipate things. But help me understand what the administration needs from the board tonight, and what do you see in the next few months going forward on this?
Okay. I'll give you a couple thoughts, and then I'm sure Matt or Mark might have some other thoughts too. I think initially tonight what we're looking for from you is, do you have clarifying questions about any of the proposals that are currently being made? In other words, is there something that just doesn't make sense, or you need some more information about? I think, obviously, before we go a whole lot farther in this process, we believe we're going to need to now go back into the community and back to the staff to say, here's the plans for various buildings. We need your feedback as to how those pieces address the concerns that you previously expressed. As a board, probably for tonight, as much as anything, it's just making sure that there's nothing here that you would say, this doesn't make any sense at all. We don't see even going forward with even thinking about it or even looking at it as a possibility. On the other hand, if you said, gee, this is a great idea, let's go forward and do this, we would put together the details of how you could actually, play this out again, looking at all the things we're talking about in terms of not only how would you stage and work with the pieces, but also how would you pay for various parts of it. So I think really tonight it's not so much that we are looking for, I really like X, Y, or Z. It's what don't I understand about what's being proposed. I'm confused about why you're saying it's okay to do this here, but it's not okay to do it here. Or, again, and I guess just selfishly, if there's something here you look at and say, I would never even consider or support looking at something like this. Those are things that I think we need to know probably as soon as we can. So if they're going to go off the table, we're not going to spend a great amount of time working on it. Does that help?
Yes, that helps.
Yeah. So this is absolutely not the. Yes, at the end of this, we'd like you to vote and tell us what you want to do. But this is really to tell us kind of whether there are questions about what's being shared, and then we're looking more than anything else probably for a blessing to take whatever's left on the table and take it out and share it with various groups.
So board members, if we took the discussion maybe two pieces, first address any questions about the plan itself to Mark, and then after that we could go into a discussion about how we would move forward with the community. Okay. So is there any questions board members have about the facility plan approach that they would like to address? Margaret?
First, I'd like to echo Ann. I think this report really helps for a framework on things. This is wonderful. Thank you. Studies have shown that if you put a rat in a maze and you set a fire in one end of the maze, they'll run to another end and pay attention to something inane. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask about the turf. Because when I look at $107 million, I'll just talk about the turf.
Sure.
Because $2 million saved is $2 million earned. I was wondering, in the new conference we're in, is turf on athletic facilities common or not?
Yes, it is.
It is in the Big nine.
in the Big Nine.
And becoming more prevalent, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's mainly, Margaret, based on the multi-sports that are expecting to use an interscholastic facility to play games and practice on. So, you know, we've had, with football, we basically have told everybody else to stay off the field. But now we don't have just football. We have boys and girls soccer. We have boys and girls lacrosse. And each of those entities is saying, why is football the only one that ever gets to use the field?
And we should be clear, soccer, varsity soccer, for sure uses Memorial Field for some games.
For some games.
Actually, I think for most of their games, but I think the key thing is that it's really the fall. And, you know, we have some pieces in the spring, and when we start up here in a few months, when you drive by, you're going to see people playing everywhere that, and even some places that might have been considered a ditch not too long time ago in terms of really any green space that we have in the spring is used. And I think that that's part of it. It would, that kind of synthetic surface would allow for much more playability year-round, you know, at least in the time where it's not snowing and freezing like it is today.
I've just been giving a lot of thought, and yeah, I would hate to think that we had this wonderful sports facility that was only for one team, 6 or 7 games of the year. And the other varsity athletes definitely have, they should be able to play in their own stadium. And I think we're going to be looking at ultimate frisbee, fielding teams, etc. And then we've got the concessions there for money making for the boosters. So I guess, yeah, mainly I just wanted to see if turf is it coming, and sounds like it is.
Other questions? No.
I would like to qualify the comment that we're talking about artificial turf or natural turf,
Yes, thank you.
because they're both turf.
Yes, you're right.
I have read recently and heard recently that one of the premier fields for football is St. Olaf, because it's a natural turf, and it's conditioned in such a way that of all the fields that the teams play on, St. Olaf has the least amount of injuries because of the condition of the field being a natural turf. Now that doesn't support an argument that maybe it also would get beat up for the wrong reasons. But I guess I would put injuries ahead of everything else, and saying if we can support a program that minimizes injuries to the people and the participants and the athletes, I would encourage that. How to spread that use of that field around is different. And maybe that's the second bullet we'd have to bite, is decide how much commitment do we want to one field and one sport.
Because the discussion that I guess, you know, we've had it as I've talked to other Big Nine superintendents and whatever, because I've asked, I've said, you know, we don't have an artificial field, and, you know, at this point in the short term, we're not looking at getting one. What are you finding? Well, it's the issue of it. It isn't just for the football games or just the games. Lots of other things happen there. You know, right now we avoid practicing on that field because we're so concerned about the fact that it'll be damaged to the point that it can't be used. We don't do anything on it much in the spring other than just a few activities, again, because the fear is when the grass is just growing, it gets damaged, and then by fall the field looks bad and isn't really greened up the way they want it to be. So I think it's an issue of you're not only having it for the games for multiple sports, but you're having it for a lot of practices by a lot of different groups who then feel comfortable using it because they know they're not going to damage it. It's interesting as we discussed tonight. You know, we've got the $2 million piece and we've got the $105 million piece. But I think it's important because we do know that I think very quickly you will get people on this side of the issue and on that side of the issue as you go forward. And I think we just have to be prepared for that as we discuss this in terms of what's there. So Other pieces, as you think about the buildings, again, elementary buildings, middle school building, high school building, what kinds of thoughts or questions do you have about those spaces?
I went to school here years ago, and I like going to school here, but I know that this is a California plan. It was in the 1960s. So if we, in your mind, with the space that we have, if we just tore the whole thing down and it's 2015, what would you build on the space that proposed? You know what I mean? Because you could build anything you want here. What would be the norm in 2015 in this space for high school?
Yeah, like if we built a new high school,
Right.
what would it look like? Right? That's what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, because if you just
It would look like the picture.
tore it down, so
Would look like
you'd
that.
still, you'd build the same, school that you wanted to build out there, but why not, you've got a year to have some kids in school here, but in that same building that you have, why do you need to put it over there as opposed to here? I mean, if you're gonna tear it down anyway.
Yeah, I think it'd be more economical that if you were going to tear it down and rebuild it, right, and build a new school, I think it'd be more economical to just build a new school, occupy it, and then tear it down and turn it into parking or athletic fields versus, trying to find a place to accommodate students for, the 2 years literally that it would take to build a building. Where would you put those students? And you tear it. Yeah, I think, tearing it down where it is, getting rid of the footings and the foundations, the utilities, and trying to build on top of it, I think it'd be more prudent to, if you have the availability like you do on the site, to build it elsewhere on the site first and then tear it down. I think it just makes more sense. And part of the problem would be maybe it is the matter of where do you house those 1,300 students for the time it would take to build the new high school.
I think the only thing I can give you is just from experience. When I was in Osseo, we did a $140+ million project. We only built one building out of that $140 million. Everything else were additions and remodeling of existing buildings. And we were in a panic every single year because you had to do the vast majority of the work in the 3-month window when kids were out of school. And, we came up on more than one occasion with it not, being right up to the day and begging a building official or begging the fire marshal to come back and do one more walkthrough and saying, is this okay? The idea of being able to do staged work, where in the case of both the high school building and of Greenville Park, you really have the capability of building the new buildings, getting everything ready to go, and then simply physically moving the things that are inside the building from one space to another. And in the case of Greenville Park, because the level of work that has to be done for it to house an early childhood center is significantly less than even the remodeling of Greenville Park. You literally could do the work on that over the summer. When it's done, you could move your preschool programming and your community services programming in the fall and be ready to go. And so it would make a huge difference in terms of that piece. In terms of the high school, I don't physically see any way in the world with the kind of, if you were actually going to build a new building, that you would try to build the building on top of the existing building site. Because number one, you tear it down. Number two, then where are 1,250 kids going to go for 2 years in the community without just completely doing fruit basket upset? So, in both of those situations, both for the high school and for the Greenville Park changeover, in both of those cases, you're really looking at the real advantage of staging the work so that you physically can keep everything in its existing space right up until the time you move people over. and you have the most limited amount of disruption for kids and for parents and for staff that you could possibly have. Actually, the other projects may be more disruptive. Work on Sibley, work on Bridgewater, where you're doing that work. That has to basically happen in the summer, and it has to be done, because at the end of the summer it really needs to be ready to go. And again, that takes some, as Mark knows and I know from previous experience, some real careful planning to make sure that happens.
Well, I think we know too, Jeff, there's some real sentiment to this site for our community. And really, we're really fortunate to have two sites. How many school districts can say we could probably build on the same site?
Yeah, that's nice.
You know, maintain the sentimental piece of the location on Division Street, and yet still get something that could potentially serve us for 50 or 60 years. We're not talking anything tonight about land, and I guarantee if you talk to the other schools tonight that are talking about possible building projects, every one of them is talking about land, and we're very fortunate not to have to do that under the approaches that have been presented.
Well, and I'm sure the shelf life on that, you know, you take something like this and, you know, after 20 years, 30 years, you need a new roof, you need a lot of new things, and if you build something brand new and you get 50 years out of it, that's, you know, it's a nice deal. Not to mention the price tag. What about one thing I wanted to mention is, in your opinion, or maybe this is that we can't go back and change things that were built, but I'm just wondering why the cafeteria in the middle school is small. I mean, it seems like was that just obviously a design flaw from the beginning?
I think in terms of the number of students that are there right now, there probably could have been some modifications in the way the cafeteria was built that might have given us some additional space. But, you know, it's really hard for, you know, I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't want to second guess the architect or the folks that were there. Noel, you were definitely there. I don't know if it came down to this is as big a space as we can put in with the money we have. In the end, a lot of things tend to come down to, you know, we've got this is the amount of money we finally have to work with this particular project, and this is the square footage it'll buy. You know, that's, and I don't know whether they were thinking about a different number of lunch periods. Obviously now we're at 4 lunch periods, which makes it much better than it's been. And by going to 4, now we're down to about, with 4, about 225 to 240 kids per lunch session, which makes it much better when and I see Chris in the audience, basically when you had 3 lunch periods and you were trying to put 900 kids in 3 lunch periods, now you got 300 kids in the cafeteria, and that is jam-packed. Even I guess the other piece is even the choice of what kind of furniture you use. Because over the course of the last 10 years, we've changed out most of the furniture in the middle school and gone to a different setup for furniture because we can get more students at the tables with the chairs added on them than we can with separate tables and chairs.
No, you wanted to come.
My understanding, and I remember correctly, I make a lot of things up, but I think this is
but see, you're the only one remembers, so
there aren't a whole lot of people out there that challenge me sometimes. I believe the intent was to have more than one, to have several lunch periods, with the intent that they could use several lunch periods to the advantage of also handling the staging of the class periods, so that they could spread it out over perhaps even 5 lunch periods. Mm-hmm. And yeah, most of what I said is probably true.
Well, and I mean, obviously that would give you the answer. If there was really a thought that you could operate with 5 lunch periods, Now you're down to less than 200 kids in the cafeteria. The cafeteria is plenty big.
I think it was lunch periods and classes that were going to be trying to match up in a way that was putting less pressure on everybody.
And I think, people who do the scheduling know the problematic piece is always when you have to schedule the lunches that come at the beginning of the long period or the end of the long period are fine. The lunch that you have to go to class for 25 minutes and then go to lunch and then come back for 25 minutes is the class that nobody really is all that anxious to be the instructor of, because number one, they're hungry before and they're thinking about going to lunch, and afterwards they're hungry, they're full, and then they're not maybe thinking about learning the way you'd hope they would.
No.
I have a excellent report, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm overwhelmed with opportunity here. We really do have a lot of choices here, I believe. One choice, however, that I didn't see is repurposing of the high school. I think the high school is well, it's younger than I am. It's a wonderful facility,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it has a tremendous opportunity if it could be repurposed. And one of your comments is that the buildings are really in pretty good condition.
Right.
This building is not deteriorating significantly, maybe in the roof, maybe a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it's a huge amount of space. And it's got parking, it's got a lot of advantages, but I didn't see a possibility of reconfiguring the high school as an option. I'm not opposed to building a new high school,
Mm-hmm.
but I am opposed to destroying this facility in total. Perhaps part of it might be appropriate with the repurposing and so on. But I would like to hear a little bit more about that. And I wouldn't expect that we'd probably hear anything tonight.
Yeah, could you just step out?
Pull up that next slide that you didn't show.
Right, yeah, my surprise slide. Well, that's a great question. And what you're saying is you still would likely build a new high school potentially on the site.
Yep.
And maybe there's some use for at least part of this facility, whether it be, the early childhood or, I don't want to say elementary school, but, who knows, right?
I didn't see that, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
the community should be asking, if they're not, they should be asking that question.
Right.
And I don't think we have a good answer.
Yeah, that might
I
take some more.
I think the sense right now is if you're looking at the building with a significant chunk of it being built in '63, and again, for you and me, that's still a fairly young building.
That's a new building.
That's almost a new building. But it also is built in a way that it is about as energy wasteful as it can possibly be. Jeff hit it on the head. It's the California plan. Everything's one story. Everything originally had an outside window because you were never going to air condition a high school building. You would always operate with ventilation, through the windows. So we have these courtyards that we have to try to bring a tractor into the middle of the courtyard, cut the grass and trim the trees and do all the other pieces. And as you can see, the site plan for a new building, and I believe this is this Coon Rapids?
Andover.
Yeah, it's actually Andover.
This is Andover. That's their footprint. That basically, you can create a building that is a lot more compact, a lot easier for kids to get from point A to point B. I was watching our junior high kiddos going through the hallways tonight with their 8th grade conferences and whatever, and you could just see, the eyes with, and if you go clear down here, this is the M wing, and then you go to the B wing, and where they've been used to this very compact. I go into the 8th grade wing, it's all right there. So there are some issues, I think, in terms of just the fact that it is the equivalent of a horse built by committee. It has become not even a 2-hump camel, maybe a 3-hump camel. Just with the fact that you have all these pieces that have been added on, again, trying to maintain some integrity of the open spaces. And, we really have not touched this building in terms of how we've done roughing pieces on it. We've not touched tuck pointing. There's a major chunk of this building that is 63 needs that. It has all single pane windows. Really, all the windows need to be replaced. All the doors need to be replaced. All 53 of them, 48 of them, whatever it is. So they, and again, created with the idea that you had to have 50 different ways to get out of the building, which, now, again, with a more compact building, you have fewer entrances and exits to get you where you need to go. So I think part of the issue, Noel, is we're not sure with the high school building, which means it's got cabinetry, it's got toileting, it's got all the other pieces built for high school kids, how well it would work as a preschool building or even as an elementary building. And as an elementary building, sitting across the street from an elementary building probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think the other issue too is when we look at the footprint, and trying to keep all of the green play fields on this site as well. If you put another structure on this site, I think one of the things that would come into play would be, there are some things that are right under where Mark has that building. There's a baseball field and a softball field and several other fields to try to maintain them located on the site. This is some space that would need to be reclaimed if we were to keep everything where it currently is. It doesn't mean we couldn't find other potential solutions for that, but just in order to accommodate the kinds of activities that take place at a high school, we need to reclaim some of the green space that we lose by building the building on top of it, if that makes sense.
So are you saying that building has already been built, that school you're talking about?
The footprint.
The footprint is Andover High School.
Only so that when I was looking for
Just
about
to come up with
1,500 square foot
how many
high
square
school,
feet.
I had an idea of how big it really would be. Yeah.
Well, even on that, it'd be interesting just to look at the side-by-side for the energy efficiency compared to the old, and you'd have all of those numbers and all of that data right there, and just figure out what the return on investment is over time for just energy efficiency.
Ellen? Oh, I'm sorry, Rob.
I have a question about the Greenbelt Park piece of this. If we, in the plan to just remodel it and partially enclose the classrooms, you would need to do the heating and ventilation before you did that, which is like 2.7 million for the boiler and all this. So because the current system wouldn't work with the circulation of the air, right? So
Right.
If you were to convert to a early childhood community center, are you also enclosing those? Would you want to include the 2.7 million at that time for the boiler, or wouldn't you have to?
I think there it's more independent. So kind of like we do have this whole list of deferred maintenance items that do need to be considered, at some point. There's, I think, 10 million district-wide of consideration level ones, that do need to be considered. So I think as part of this whole process, keep in mind that there are deferred maintenance items. So this was one at Greenville that if you did start putting up walls, creating separate rooms, you'd have to do something to the ventilation system. And then it's like, do you really spend money on these old steam coils when it makes more sense at that time in a 45-year-old building to then do those upgrades? I mean, you could still theoretically, repurpose Greenville Park, and you may decide that we also need to upgrade this facility from steam to hot water and energy efficient boilers. It would be kind of a separate decision at that point. Whereas I believe now, if you did those upgrades as an elementary, then you really need to do them at that time. It'd just be prudent, because otherwise you'd spend money on mechanical systems and an old system that just wouldn't make economic sense. So you still have deferred maintenance items at Greenville Park, to consider. It's just, they wouldn't have to happen, I don't believe, at the time that you did the early childhood repurposing.
Just wondering, since according to the Sibley was older school than Greenville, was that boiler replaced more recently?
You know,
Yeah.
maybe Paul could answer that.
It was replaced when we put the addition on.
Yeah, 4 years ago.
Yeah, they basically took the old boiler out, put a new boiler in. Yeah.
So right, at least at Sibley, you've got numerous more recent additions, 2010, 2003. So yeah, maybe some of these upgrades have been done to that building at that time.
But I think, Rob, too, when we looked at it, the space as it is would be a real, there'd be a lot more space than what we currently have for our early childhood programming. And we could really feasibly move kids into that space without a ton of work to Greenville Park right away. But if we so chose, we could do some additional pieces to Greenville if needed, but we don't think, kids aren't there for the length of time that an elementary school student is. Parents who are coming in and out, they're typically not there for the whole day. So you could feasibly move stuff in with very little done to the building. That's not to say that we couldn't do some things, but our initial concept was to do as little as necessary and still be a pretty significant expansion of some programming.
Alice? So I had questions in sort of 3 areas. The first is cost, and I think you answered part of it already, Mark, so the deferred maintenance has not been included in any of the pieces that we're looking at. So the $107 million is not including any of the Tier 1 deferred maintenance, right?
That's correct.
Except in Greenville Park,
Except
the independent
HVAC,
version,
right.
right?
Yep, except in Approach 1, Greenville Park, that $2.8 million.
And then the costs are in today's cost, that's, I assume. And then the cost that we would also have to consider if we added an additional building, we would have one more building that we would have to consider that we would be supporting.
The operational cost.
Right.
Yeah, an
Absolutely.
operational cost, right?
And I would say that my costs, just because I knew that if we did something, it wouldn't happen today, I believe my costs are in at least like 2017, 2018
They've got some
dollars.
inflation.
There's some inflation on there, just knowing that,
Nice.
I just had to kind of pick
Won't happen today.
a date,
No.
but
And I'm appreciative of the fact that you called out the operational costs, because we know one of the things that many school districts fail to include is that you need to clean the building, you need to look at, do you need nursing services in that building? So that's a piece we've talked about that we want to make sure as we move forward with whatever approach we choose or not choose, that we make sure that we consider those operational costs, because so many places just don't even consider them and then are surprised that they're there. But we know they're there up front.
Well, and the other big piece too with Greenville Park, and I think coming back to kind of Rob's original question, I think the concept of doing the kind of remodel and move in gives a new group of entities that are coming together really for the first time kind of in history of having everybody together as they probably should have been all along, a chance to do that. Plus, with the fact that we're still sitting with very much alive either a universal 4-year-old or other type of 4-year-old programming as an option coming through the legislature. And at that point, every district will be scrambling to find 4-year-old space. So, it has the potential to build in for us the capability of supporting the 4-year-old program. At the same time, I think the other thing is we're kind of looking at the Greenville Park piece on that side, and then the new Greenville building is a lot of the things that have been thorns in people's sides since 1971 could be addressed in the new building. Because if you're building a building to be a K-5 building, you can create it with full walls and full doors and enclosed classrooms and all the things that not only staff at times, but parents at times have used as reasons why I don't want to be in that building or I don't want my children to be in that building. We could erase that completely. And we would create on the west side of the district the newest elementary building, which also, as we think about how to support balancing elementary enrollment, I think there are always some advantages of it being the newest elementary building in town for how people look at it.
So the other two areas are kind of tied together, and I guess they follow what Dr. Richardson was talking about, and that's, so building a new elementary building, it seems like you would want to consider at the same time, you had said, Mark, you didn't address the fact that we may have to think about enrollment or boundaries or pieces like that, but the building that you had proposed was like a 600 student population. You would wonder whether we would still need the additions onto Sibley. Bridgewater, part of it was an office addition, but whether those spaces would be needed if the enrollment was changed. And then the other piece is, so that's part of the question, and the other piece is where we started last summer was talking about flexible learning spaces. And so I was a little surprised. First, thank you for the report, it's terrific. But I was a little surprised that there wasn't any sort of remodeling addressing those sorts of spaces. I mean, obviously, if you have a new building at the high school or a new elementary, like you were saying, Dr. Richardson, all of a sudden you would get all those sort of things. But the plan didn't talk about sort of that. You came with these sort of beautiful pictures about spaces. And
Right. I would say, I tried to address a little bit of that when I did that addition to Greenville Park. Trying to address that flexible space out in, which could be that first grade house, if you will. You know what I mean? But otherwise, and part of it I think was that, and granted that we didn't do the directions presentation or the trends presentation to all these groups that, that Mr. Hillman and Superintendent Richardson met with, but, none of those items were really brought up other than, than us and best practices. And so I guess at Bridgewater, it seemed like the main thing was really the controlled entrance. Bridgewater does have somewhat some of those flexible breakout areas. I just don't know that they're used, or maybe they're not quite appropriately sized. But honestly, I just didn't feel like I could take it to that next level and say, well, we need even a larger addition to accommodate some of these, 21st century learning things that we're seeing. I mean, that could be another step that maybe I should take a look at. But I just maybe kind of felt like we're maybe already getting, and that would maybe help address some of maybe the long-range plan things that we're trying to address. But yeah, I just didn't really see that as being that critical need at this point. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, that's
certainly if it was a new building. And I know that when I planned additions to the high school, I mean, I know that, and I didn't say it, but if you looked at that plan for the new main entrance, I talked about a common space. My thought is that maybe at the new public entry, there could be an enlarged commons, maybe kind of a gathering space for students, spaces where you'd have appropriate space for student services and guidance and attendance, and that whole thing would be reconfigured appropriately. But you're right in that I didn't go anywhere else in the rest of the building and say, let's try to provide some multi-use, multi-purpose
Well, at Sibley, there's that the Sibley concept does have the potential for a multi-purpose space with the expansion of that cafeteria. It's not, it certainly isn't what we've seen in some of the directions presentations, but it is. There's a piece there. We had used the term makerspace, but we were careful to back it off to be multi-purpose, to be timeless.
True. And I think the media center addition that we proposed at Sibley, could accommodate some of these flexible multi-use type spaces. But I didn't really, other than those sorts of things, I didn't go back into the building and try to remodel and add more space to accommodate some of those kind of more 21st century type learning spaces.
no.
One of the things that I would like to see as part of consideration is the operating cost per something. I don't think I want to see the operating cost per student, but I'd like to see the operating cost per square foot for the buildings that we have, and compare that against what the operating costs would be for a proposed new building. And I say that partly out of sarcasm, not to you folks, but I had somebody come by and offer me new windows on my house, and the cost of the energy savings was going to be out about 20 years. Well, I can enjoy this house for 20 years. Current payments. It's real nice. Thank you. So I think it would help us consider. We'd said, this is sort of, parts of us are leaky. Some of these buildings are sort of leaky for a lot of reasons. And it may be that there are ways that we could understand the whole picture a whole lot easier if we knew some of the operating costs. So I do property management, and I use this all the time to help my owners understand where they should spend their capital dollars. They're going to insulate, they're going to put in new windows, we're going to put on new doors, or what are we going to do it so that we can minimize the operating costs. There's some way to put that on a spreadsheet. I don't need it complex, but I'd be interested in seeing some relationships.
I'm sure we can do that. I'm sure we can do that.
Well, because even with our existing buildings, you know which one is the most energy efficient.
I don't.
Longfellow. And Longfellow is energy efficient because it's multi-story.
I have a building that I manage. It was built the same year Longfellow was built, and it's the most efficient building we got.
Yeah, well, and if you think about it,
It's a nuclear fallout shelter.
it was a fallout shelter. It's got thick walls. It's got plaster on the inside. I mean, it is built to last, and yet at the same time, we're struggling with issues with deteriorating bricks on the outside, deteriorating. We're going to have to continue to do tuck pointing work. We had to do a rework of the upper facade that's on the front of the building because of issues where that's crumbling and not working anymore. So, but in terms, any building that we're talking about here in a new building that's a multi-story building is going to be significantly more energy efficient than any single story spread out. You just got more roof area to have air leak through, more windows, more everything to deal with.
But then the comparison might be middle school, which would be the two-story with hopefully efficient windows and all the rest of it. And that might be then the benchmark that we would use for looking backward or forward.
I think there's probably a way we can at least give you a ballpark.
It may be as simple as looking at the energy cost against some square footage or something.
Yeah. And I think that would be what you'd have to use would be energy cost per square footage for single-story buildings versus multi-story buildings.
Yes.
It at least would give us some comparative.
Use real numbers for what we have, and then forecast for what might be
exactly.
built.
Right.
Exactly.
Your point on Longfellow too, and that's a two-story building. And I remember I went to dating myself, but went to kindergarten through third grade there. And
You spent a lot of time in
Yeah.
school.
It was the best 6 years
yeah,
of my life.
exactly. But I mean, when I go in there and I look at Longfellow now, I mean, it reminds me of just such great shape of even when I was in school there. So, which is a nice testimony for that school.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. We know we have a great maintenance crew. We have a great custodial crew. People keep the buildings up. The pieces, though, that are in the deferred maintenance, there's a healthy chunk of money that we're going to have to do to spend, regardless of what we do, if we keep all the existing buildings as they are. And even like with Greenville Park, where we did tuck pointing this summer, there's more tuck pointing to do because every inch of that building needs to be gone over and tuck pointing. Because, again, built in 1971. All right, other questions people have?
Rob?
You said earlier that the high school part and the Greenville part could be independent of each other.
Yes.
But that doesn't, Greenville would eliminate one of the athletic fields, isn't that where lacrosse is? So that might actually trigger the artificial turf if you just build Greenville, a new Greenville. Because you're eliminating that. So that might cause you to have to do something with consolidating the athletic fields at the high school.
Okay, because I do know that that a chunk of the lacrosse is played at the middle school in the fields that are north of the north and east of the middle school building.
What I'm thinking is, could we add some more bleachers to the middle school football field to put that turf off for a little bit? And what the cost on that would be?
And again, my only sense as you kind of look through this tonight is that nobody's going to have the solution for you tonight. But I understand that anytime we see a $2 million figure to put artificial turf on a field, people go, followed by. The reality is, in all the things we're looking at, it is one of the smallest expenditures of everything we're doing. And if you didn't do it at all, yeah, we'd have to live with trying to figure out what to do. I guess I'm more interested tonight, if we can, in terms of making sure that we've gotten your questions answered about the structures. My sense, Rob, would be, we've continued to have to try to find homes for lacrosse ever since it came to us in the last couple of years. And so, we would have to think about where that makes sense and how that makes sense. And are there any other places in the Greenville Park, 21 acres, that could house lacrosse fields?
Right.
Because again, there's a pretty good chunk of grass, even back in behind the community gardens and back towards the creek. And lacrosse is not it's not a very fancy field. It's basically just a grass field with lines on it. It's not crowned. It doesn't have any kind of special pieces on it. So I think it probably maybe until we get to the point of people saying, I want parity in terms of my field with football, it's probably maybe the least or maybe the most accommodating in terms of something we could do differently.
I had a question with the conversion of Greenville to a community center, ECN Community Center. The current community school, do we envision that staying in that facility, or would that go to the new Greenville school? We chose that option.
I think the concept of Greenville Park was a K-5 building.
Just K-5, so that community school.
And that means it would be the community school.
Okay.
So you would now have a preschool and community services and early childhood special ed and family ed and potentially a 4-year-old program and all the other pieces in one building. And across the parking lot, you'd have the K-5 Greenville Park Community School, the new one.
And the model of the community school is using licensed teachers and EAs right after school.
So it would be moved to that new building.
And since we're on the same location, population is the same, we're working with the same kids and the same parents.
Any other comments or questions?
I've been thinking a little bit more about what Mr. Stratmoen said about repurposing the high school. And so anyway, just a couple of thoughts would be, I think somebody alluded to, if it was something like an elementary building, or some facility that you'd still need cafeteria, media center, kitchen. You'd still need a lot of those functions. So you'd try to keep what's here and use what's here, and then maybe tear down the other components you didn't need, and maybe keep or reconfigure classrooms. And then you'd probably need to then also find some field space, playground space, etc. for those students on the same site. That might be a little tricky, and I think you run out of space. But maybe something like, I'm just thinking maybe something like the, some of the programs that are offered at the NCRC, where I don't think you need kitchen, cafeteria, media center necessarily. It's more office, classroom type spaces, do you know what I mean? Where maybe if you said, well, there's certain rooms, certain spaces in this high school that we could salvage and keep those and tear down the majority of it, you wouldn't need much in terms of outside field space, not a whole lot. Maybe not as much parking and things like, maybe something like that could work. Do you know what I mean? But to try to make it a...
You want to read? I can read you my list.
Oh, well, okay. Sure.
I'm not sure this is even appropriate, but on my list I said community ed rec district office, early childhood, Northfield Community Resource Center, perhaps a charter school could be in here, and that may not take up the whole footprint. To which some of the footprint would come down to allow for some of the more green space and fields that would be necessary to support some of it, not much of it, but some of it.
Right, okay.
So those are the thoughts. I didn't have the thought of an elementary school.
Right, sure. It would be difficult. Yeah, okay.
Okay, I just had a couple quick questions. Again, I want to echo what several board members have said. I think it was absolutely masterful the way you were able to really drill down the most critical elements that would support teachers and really support our students to be successful. I mean, it's such a comprehensive report, and I think it really reflects the process that we've followed in getting to this piece of it, and I think it's absolutely amazing what you were able to put together. I had just one couple questions. One about if the Greenbelt Park were to stay the elementary, if we were to go to the one proposal where it would stay as a elementary school. There was some notes previously about maybe not having adequate cafeteria and media center space. When you went and reevaluated, did you just decide then that that was going to be more or less workable?
Yes.
Okay.
You know what? Yeah, I believe so. And honestly, I think if I did see that comment that you're referring to, and then I did look a little bit more closely. And when I looked at Greenbelt Park, I believe that's the one where I did comment earlier on that I believe it has the largest media center of all the elementaries.
Okay.
So, that almost might be a typo, maybe.
Okay.
Because I believe the media center is fairly large at Greenbelt Park. The cafeteria is small, but it's not as small as it is at Sibley.
Okay.
And that's why I didn't try to address it.
No, I mean, I really appreciate
Yeah.
appreciate the way you were able to really just capture what were the most critical elements and really to be as conservative in your approach. And those were just two areas I wanted to ask about. Mm-hmm. Then also, in addition, at Sibley, I know we've had some conversation and possibly we addressed that with the newest edition about number of restrooms. So is the Sibley restroom facility, I'm assuming then I didn't see that we had to address it, so I know, did we do with the latest edition some restroom facilities at Sibley?
If you look at the Sibley schematic on page 51, you'll see there's the large, what they call gang restrooms, girls and boys, which are right on the other side of the kitchen.
Okay.
Those have been
Those
have been significantly expanded.
Okay.
There's the two small handicapped accessible toilet areas, which are right next to the psych and the kindergarten room, just to the west of the cafeteria. And they're the original girls and boys restrooms that are down by the music commons, next on the end of that grade level 2 space. I think we really tried to address adding additional restrooms when we did the last edition.
Right. I do believe, like you're saying, Dr. Richardson, that in that center core where the reading is and the girls and the boys and the toilet, I do believe that wasn't that part of a recent alteration that those were expanded? Right, exactly.
So, yes, I just want to be sure so that we're good there.
Because those used to be locker room, shower room areas.
Right.
Good. And again, I think that probably the most sobering news for all of us was this $12 million we'd spend on the high school that would really address barely a portion of what people really, everyone expressed as real concerns. And I think I felt the same way about Longfellow, that, you know, it as is, it didn't really have the opportunity to address a number of the sort of issues that the stakeholders have shared in terms of putting early childhood together and et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that one thing with the high school that I think we're, again, is kind of the struggle is, I think as Mark and the folks from ATS&R kind of put that together, they took a look at the most pressing needs. You know, we need to get the accessibility. We need to get music space that makes sense for the number of kids that are here. We need gym space to make sense. We need locker room spaces to make sense. And we need to try to come up with a way to restructure the office space so we really get a flow and a security entrance. It's the building that I think people are most concerned about in terms of providing security. But the reality is, I think, you know, Mark could have gone back in and said, we need to renovate, you know, all of the classroom wings of this building to try to address issues that those wings have. The parts where it's going to get difficult are the width of hallways, the California style of building where basically everything is on a double corridor with outside walls on both sides. Things that you just can't fix without basically knocking it down. So, you know, I think that the thing, and I think, Noel, you're absolutely right that we need to at least think about what else might be usable. The problem I see as we go forward is going to be in trying to create a smaller footprint that keeps a piece of the building. Will the part that we want to keep be located in the place on the grassy part of what's left that still gives us room for all of the athletic fields and play fields and other kinds of areas that we need to have, or will it end up being right in the middle of something that needed to be an open space? And I just don't know how to pick it up and, you know, say, yeah, I think this part of the building is savable, let's move it over X.
I have two comments. One, I agree with you, but I also think it would be a disservice to the community if we didn't do it.
I agree.
Secondly, I don't want to be unappreciative of what you've done, but flip over to page 11. Scroll over to page 11. What page are you on now?
I was on like 51, but
Well, then stop at page 30.
Okay, it's 30.
On page 30.
Page 30 is
Yeah.
the middle school
Coming up.
here we go. Yeah.
floor plan.
All right, let's see show me the first paragraph. You have the Northfield Middle School in the northwest quadrant of the community. Second paragraph, second line
Yeah.
down. You also have the Sibley School, the Greenville School, and the Longfellow School in the northwest quadrant of the community. So I've done it. I think you did, and that used some of the same words for the repeating paragraphs. Anyhow.
Okay. So, and I'm sorry, which one is the wrong one? Is this the incorrect one?
Anything that says northwest that isn't
Only one
Greenville
could be in
Park
the northwest.
Yeah.
Longfellow are wrong. They all are.
These folks will figure it out for you.
Well,
Others
figure
are
it out.
east
I'll figure it
or
out.
southeast.
Southeast and south central
Yes.
and middle or
Yeah.
something.
I have a comment on hall width. I mean, when this school was just as this, and I know it's kind of a zoo in here with that, and I would believe that, you know, this was built in 63, 65, it was probably the intent just to have 3 grades in here, and then eventually you've got 3 additions on top of that. So, you know, is there a general rule for what is proper for a hall width based on movement or?
I'd say more best practices, and again, it just depends on how the building is laid out, right? I mean, if it's like the Andover High School example, that's much more compact, so you get a lot more students concentrated in a certain space. So I'm certain those corridors are probably, maybe twice, I don't want to say twice as wide, but another 50% wider. There's no real formula, no real calculation other than best practices based on, how many students are going where, and what the circulation is in the building. You know what I mean? There's not really just a standard metric for the width of a corridor, other than just understanding the overall building layout and circulation and how many students are. And if there's are there lockers in the corridors, or are there locker commons areas, of course, certainly have an impact,
Because if you look at most of ours, we have lockers on both sides of the corridors in a lot of the classroom rooms. So the issue is during passing time, you got kids opening their lockers on both sides. Now your corridor is now, 2 to 2.5 or 3 feet narrower than it was, 2 minutes before that before the bell rang. So yeah, there's some loading issues there. And as Mark said, it's how many rooms are down that hallway, how many kids have to go down that hallway to get to what they want to do. If the hallways, because the building is more compact and shorter, there's a lot more kids loading, then you got to have a wider hallway. If you got less rooms or different setup of rooms, then you probably can have a corridor that's not as wide. But I think it comes with the building design and how many kids and how many rooms you have in each corridor.
Mm-hmm.
Julie, can I just recognize, Paul Bell has been here, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, been here all night, and Paul has been really integral. If you think about all the work that happened last summer and walking through all the buildings with the architects, Paul has just been such an integral part of the team, and as usual, he sits and listens, and tomorrow he's going to have the perfect solution for something that he
Have all of this figured out for us.
I just really want to publicly thank Paul for all of his work, because when you talk about operating cost per square footage, he'll probably have it done in about 15 minutes, because I think he's probably already got most of it done. So I just want to make sure we recognize Paul for his
he's got the numbers on our
work.
existing buildings right now.
Probably has it already.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Just got to print it.
Yeah.
Yes, we do appreciate you being here tonight, absolutely, and all the work you do. So if we have sort of got an overview and questions and comments regarding the plan itself, if we want to move forward and talk about how we would go forward to the community and other stakeholders.
So again, what I've heard tonight is there is a desire to at least look at what are potential reuses of the high school building or portions of the high school building. And we'd really like to have that to be able to share with people that it could be a complete demolish versus a partial demolish. I didn't necessarily hear a lot of other major questions about the proposed projects or potential projects in terms of those being kind of the pieces that we would need to take a look at. And obviously, we know we're going to have to spend some time helping people to think about the turf and why that might make sense or doesn't make sense for people as we go forward. But I think with that piece, I think we should be at a point now where we could go back out to the community and back out to the staff and share with them the information about what's happening with the buildings and asking them for specific feedback about their building space and what do they think about the proposals that are being given, what things they like about it, again, what things that they would tell us, you didn't get this piece nailed down, you didn't make this piece happen that we really felt needed to happen, so that at least we have that kind of information. So I think we really kind of have a two-pronged piece. I think we need to probably get back together with Mark and with Tom just to say, what did you guys hear tonight? What other things do we need to think about adding into the final version of the plan? And then the other piece is for us then to build a schedule to go out and start meeting again. Because I think before we can go any farther, and again, Ellen brought up earlier on. The data that Mark is sharing is basically generated on the potential of a 2017 construction process or remodeling process or repair process. So this isn't something that anybody was envisioning would be something we fix this summer. Won't have it done for fall. It's not going to happen. But I think what we can do at that point is to come back to you then with feedback from the community. We can add the piece in terms of the partial maintenance of part of this high school building. The other piece I think that we need to have is the layout of the exact timing when we're going to have various bond issues come due, and so those dollars come off the tax rolls. Because I think if there's a desire to try to moderate the impact for various projects, you would want to have that align with things that we know that are happening. And we know that we have some things that I believe are in 2018 and again in 2024, 20.
That range, yes.
So, we've got some things that are pretty far out there. We've got some things that are coming in the next few years. And so we need to kind of take a look at that piece. The other piece that we'll be looking at too is going to be the impact of the all facilities bills that are moving through, because the all facilities bills could be used to address a chunk of the deferred maintenance. At the same time, if we use all facilities funding to do that, that will impact taxes. So we need to be very careful with how all those pieces come together. So I think right now, if we can do those other pieces for you, come back with some information about the energy costs, come back with some information about debt service, come back with some information about the potential maintenance of at least a portion of the existing high school building. And we prepare to go out and talk to the various staffs and buildings about the preliminary plan. Then I think within the next couple months we'll be able to come back to you with another reporting, probably a finalization of this district plan. And again, I think as Matt articulated to you at the very beginning of this, and I think these guys did too, again, remember that the plan is exactly what it is. It is the long-term roadmap of the things that need to happen. Does it all have to happen right away? Does everything that's in the plan actually have to happen? No. But I do think it's our opportunity to really think about deeply where we need to go if you're going to maintain that good stewardship of the buildings that are part of the school district, so that we don't end up on the flip side of having something that we move into a crisis mode of saying, now this building is crumbling around our ears, and now we're having to patch it back together just to make it work, or we're in a panic trying to go out for a bond issue to replace a building that we've let go too long.
So just a clarifying question, Dr. Richardson.
Sure.
I assume when we finally get to this point, we're not going to end up with two approaches. At some point, we have to, we wouldn't be saying, well, we're either going to do an independent action to upgrade facilities, or we're going to do, like.
That would be my hope, is that when we get done, we would come to you with, here is the proposed. Here would be the proposal that we think makes the most sense for all the pieces. It will include some independent pieces, and it will include some interdependent pieces, I think.
The term that we have in the report that I really like, Ellen, is pathways. There's really several different pathways that we can address a lot of these needs, and it's about which of those pathways make the most sense in the end.
But Ellen, what I'm hearing you say, though, is you would really like us in the end to come back to you with, we think this is the best overall pathway for each of the facilities that we currently have. So it's going beyond just leaving it as you got these two different ways you could go, or these three different ways you could go. You're really looking to see if we can and narrow it down to say, given all of our best thoughts, it should be this, 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 and this that you need to do when you're ready to make a decision on any of the parts.
Yes, I guess it's just that it seems like if you have a 10-year plan and you leave it open like that, the board suddenly makes a decision on something and we've taken approach 1 and ruled out approach 2.
Right.
Just being really clear as to
Yeah.
when does that,
Yeah, and that's the piece that I thought was really important tonight, was to articulate for you. There are some things you can do that will have no negative impact on taking either path. There are other things that the moment you choose to go one way, you eliminate the ability to do the other. And so I think that's why I would rather take more time to make sure we got it right than charge ahead on those things that there are multiple ways we could go. Okay.
There were 2 items that were right on my radar screen. I even looked right past them. And one of them is safety and access and egress to the buildings, where the entries are real.
Mhm.
The driving lanes are so narrow, or spaces are so narrow. Second one is security of the buildings. I think both of those are pretty paramount in the community. But, and it's on the scope.
Well, and the good thing is, I think we've got them significantly addressed now at the middle school,
Yeah.
at Sibley. We are not there at Bridgewater. We're not there at the high school. We're there at Longfellow if we continue to use, Longfellow is turned out to be a really good solution at a very, very reasonable cost in terms of that space. So it really is, Greenville Park, which I think Mark has shared with you tonight, would be a fairly reasonable process to do that, because you're really just addressing using the existing doors, and the fact that the office is right inside the door makes that one more fixable than the others. Bridgewater is difficult. The high school is difficult without the addition. And so, yeah, I think even with those, we're able to say there's, again, some things that probably just need to be done as independent projects.
I'd like to second the thought on that as far as the security and the entrance thing is a major priority, but you wonder when you look at something, if you're eventually going to tear it down, what is the worth, or what is, so obviously something temporary, or, for the high school coming in here, common sense says, gee, if you're going to tear it down eventually, don't do anything, but, you'd have to maybe look at maybe a couple of different scenarios for doing that.
Yeah.
Temporary versus
More of an intermediate.
Because, if anything happens security-wise, we are the people that they're going to come back to look at first.
Right.
So we need to make that priority number 1.
Right. Yeah, there certainly could be more of an intermediate, smaller scale way to address that entry without a big new addition, right?
Okay.
Is there anyone with final comments? Questions?
Great job.
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the great
Thank you, Mark,
questions.
Tom.
And
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
thank
Mark.
you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, we appreciate it. And board members, thanks for the great discussion and good questions. And I think we have a plan to move forward.
Okay.
Okay.
All
We will
right.
move now on to our only item for individual action, which is the 2015-16 school year calendar. Dr. Richardson?
Well, again, sharing with you the same calendar that was recommended by Meet and Confer and was presented to you at the last meeting. Again, framed with the fact that this is the latest that Labor Day falls, and so it's the latest start day that we will run into. We know there's continuing to be buzz at the Capitol about trying to fix it somehow. Everything, and it's all the way from fix it for everybody to fix it for Barnum, or fix it for, Worthington, or fix it for some individual district. Frankly, I don't think most of those are going to have much. I think I don't think they have the juice necessarily to get it done for the entire state, and I don't think the people who are opposed to it happening for the state will allow any individual districts to slip through, because I think they would see it as chinks in the armor. So I think for 15-16, we probably need to continue forward with an after Labor Day start calendar. You see what the pieces are that are here in terms of how those dates are broken down, and the fact that we're looking at the 8th being the last regular day of school unless we have 3 or more days of snow. And at this point, this calendar gives us the ability to get 2 days made up for students if we have a 3rd and 4th day of snow before the end of the year, and we have a 5th day for teachers if we need to get that particular piece done. I think this addresses those pieces and, again, pretty much leaves everything else as it is with the shortened winter break.
Before we move on to questions or comments, there's superintendent's recommendation, which is the motion to approve the 2015-16 school year calendar as recommended by the district meet and confer committee. Motion moved by Ellen, second. Second by Ann. So board members, any discussion, questions, or comments? I just wanted to ask a clarifying
Sure.
question. You alluded to the legislature. So regardless of what the legislator may do for this next school year, this would be the calendar.
This would be the calendar. And it's mainly that Anita and others are already getting the calls from people saying, I've got to plan my vacation, I got to bid for my days off, whatever, and they're already concerned that we aren't there.
I just wanted to make that clarification so
Yeah.
the community sees that something were by chance to come through, this would not change.
This will be the calendar for 15-16.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So we can vote. All those in favor of approving the calendar as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to the approval of the consent grouping. As a reminder, there was some personnel items in the table file that were added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping? Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Margaret, second? Second by Ellen. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Items for information. I did want to just mention for board members as a reminder the Transformational Technology Feedback Plan. There is a family listening session scheduled for this Thursday night at 7 p.m. in the middle school, and then again on Monday, May 2nd, again at the middle school, 7 p.m. in the media center. March 2nd, sorry, in the middle school media center. Also, future meetings, Monday, March 9th, which is our only meeting for the month of March, and then again April 13th would be our first meeting in April. Okay, with that, I ask for a motion that we adjourn.
Will be adjourned.
Moved by Noel, second. Second by Ann. We are adjourned.
Very good.